We brought together a panel who I think do it really, really well. Burns Hargis, one of our past chairs, led a great university up the road in Stillwater, Oklahoma State, and that's a lot. I told him I was wearing my orange pants for him today, and he said these are not orange, but this is as orange as I can get.
Coral.
Anyway, coral, whatever. Orange, coral, the same. But anyway, we're glad to have Burns back in the house. And then Dr. Susan Chambers, our current chair, is here this week to help with the discussion. And then our mayor, David Holt, who I think does a great job in a city that is purple, trying to make everyone happy when he can. Sometimes, like us, we had to make a decision to put the relay aside and go with the quarter. Sometimes you have to make decisions that not everybody loves. But the mayor does it as well and as collaborative as anyone I've ever seen. I personally call him America's best mayor. So with that, there you go. It's all yours.
Susan, I just can't tell you how nice it is to look at you instead of Turpin.
I've been told that before, actually. Since he's my next door neighbor.
Didn't affect you.
No. Well, I'm thrilled to be sitting between these two amazing men. And I'm going to start off by asking the mayor a question. The slice of history highlighted the consensus building process of creating this amazing memorial and museum. So for anyone that has never tried to get a handful of people to agree, let alone 350, how remarkable was that task force achieved?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will answer that in a moment. Let me just first thank everybody for being here today. Thank you, Carrie, for all that Carrie and her team do. What we're doing right now is really vital to the long-term relevancy of this space. Obviously, we primarily want to honor those who were killed, those who survived, and those who were changed forever. But we also want to carry some lessons forward, and that's what we do here. And thank you to everybody associated with the memorial, which obviously both of you have been deeply a part of that as well. And thank you for the leadership you exhibit in so many other ways. I don't know, this may be insulting to you. I was in high school and college when this process unfolded that you just described of the 350 people gathering to conceptualize what would be here. And so obviously I have no personal knowledge, but I do have great respect, yes, for any process that first even has the ambition to involve that many people. I mean, that's not to be presumed. I don't think there was any act of Congress that said you had to involve hundreds of people. I mean, it could have been like decisions sometimes are made with a much smaller group of people, but that was obviously a priority of the leadership at the time to involve as many people as possible. But when you do that, you got to. I think probably the reason that people don't engage in consensus building and compromise sometimes is just a commitment of time. So if I were engaged in a process that was going to try to find a consensus of 350 people, the first thing I would recognize is this is going to take a lot of time. I need to budget accordingly. And so I'm sure that it was hundreds of hours of conversations, and then a willingness to compromise. And the reality is, we get 70% on all these initiatives here in Oklahoma City, and we sort of hold that up rightfully as a consensus. It's not 100, obviously, right? So I have no doubt that not everybody left that enterprise feeling like they got what they wanted. If you had a situation like Carrie was just describing, one person says close Fifth Street, another says open Fifth Street. Your first task in some kind of conversation like that is to see if there's some compromise here. Maybe the thing that the gentleman who wants to keep it open aspires to represent can be captured in some other way, right? So you try to work through that. But ultimately, sometimes you'll find there are people, I don't know how that gentleman felt after that and how he feels today. And maybe he's never come here, maybe he's bitter about it. I don't know. But I think all you can do is all you can do. You try to find compromise, and usually that pleases. If you really are focused on that and you're willing to do that, you'll get those kind of 70%. That's kind of 70% buy-in. And this is the reality that's maybe hardest for people to accept, is that none of those 70% of the people are maybe thrilled, right? Maybe they're all just saying, well, this was good enough. And democratic processes, whether it's just 350 people in a task force or whether it's the development of a MAPS initiative, American democratic processes are really only really created to arrive at solutions that are good enough for everybody, right? And that seems like we live in an era when people want exactly what they want, you know, and good enough is not going to cut it. And unfortunately, we don't really have a system for producing that type of result for every single person. I am sure that for many people, they made compromises in that process and they felt like it was only good enough. Obviously, what we have today is world-class and spectacular, and oftentimes that's what happens over time, is everybody realizes maybe the things that they were so hung up on, you know, were not as big a deal as it felt like in the moment. And of course, now we have something that I would say has an approval rating that is very high. This memorial is a very special place. And so whatever the process was, whatever compromises had to be made, it obviously arrived at a really tremendous outcome for our community and the nation.
Well, Mayor, I think it's right on point. Establishing a consensus and convincing people to do something they may not want to do. And I feel like you pulled an elephant out of a hat getting the Olympics here in Oklahoma City. I mean, that's pretty good.
Yeah. Well, congrats to all of us, yes.
I'm sure that involved a lot of negotiations.
6 years, yeah. And by the way, you know, now I'm going to turn this back on you. You know, Burns always gets rightfully recognized as the president of OSU, but what a lot of people may not fully remember, maybe we're too young to remember, is that actually Burns had a very robust career as an Oklahoma City civic leader before he left us and went to Stillwater for a few years, you know? And so when you think about the foundation that was laid to get the Olympics here, I mean, I spent 6 years like advocating and lobbying and being a part of negotiations for this. But ultimately, if there had been no product to sell, which is the city, these particular venues, there would have been no point to the conversation. And people like Burns were so much a part of that foundation, and especially the river. You know, you were around still. When did you become president?
Of OSU?
Yeah.
In 08.
Yeah. So like at that point, we were having conversations about the river sport facility, the whitewater facility, being in MAPS 3.
Well, I have to confess that we had a retreat, a chamber retreat down at Lake Murray.
Uh-huh.
And remember Ray Ackerman wanted to put water in the river.
This is like, you're talking about like 91, 92, talking about putting dams on the river. Yeah.
He wanted to put water in the river, and I thought, you know, and I loved Ray Ackerman. I just respected him very much. He was a reserve admiral. Mm-hmm. And I just sheepishly asked, like, well, what would we do? I didn't even think it'd hold water. But what would we do with the river? I mean, what? And he said, well, we'll have turboats. And my mind said, you know, computer monitors coming down after a big rain. I mean, it's a mile south of Oklahoma City. I mean, you can't see anything. And of course, it turned out he was right. Yeah. So now we have a river we used to mow. We always
absolutely.
said.
Yeah.
But
so you're saying we overcame your resistance to get to this day?
No,
okay.
no,
all right,
no. I was about 28 years old. I wasn't going to resign. But I mean, actually, I'm bragging. I was quite a bit older than that. But you know, one thing we seem to have a surprisingly functioning city council. Mm-hmm. And I give a lot of that credit to you and Jim Couch and everybody that's gone before. But you know, I've noticed you're nonpartisan here, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I assume you think that's a good idea, because in Tulsa they run as partisan.
Well, they used to. They have recently changed.
Yeah. Well,
they're still breaking out of them.
I may have had some part in that, because Mike Turpin and I used to be on the radio up there on KRMG. Yeah. And I told John earlier one time, you know, their council was at it.
Right.
And I said, you know, Tulsa reminds me a lot of Italy. It's pretty. It's got a wonderful opera. It's got ballet. It's got great restaurants. And it's hopelessly ungovernable. And they said the phone rang off the wall. Get that Oklahoma City guy off of the deal. But talk about that.
Certainly. And there's other elements to that make our governance unique, at least compared to state and federal levels. It's pretty common in the municipal level around the country. But yes, the nonpartisan nature of it is certainly welcome, because even though people kind of know what you are, although sometimes I've been wrong historically, I thought I knew what somebody was, and then it turned out I was wrong. But you know, in my case, I'd already served in the state senate, so people definitely knew how I was registered. But But it does, by not having it on the ballot and by not having you sort of, wearing that badge in council, you kind of can vote however you want. I mean, you don't have like party votes, you don't have caucuses that you meet with, so you're kind of able to be just as unique as individuals truly are. I mean, parties, artificially group us together and try to, erase the many complexities of our views. And that's why in most countries there's like dozens of parties, we try to fit every American into one or two, and it just doesn't really make sense.
For now.
Yeah. We could use more. That would be a good reform. But another good reform would be to have models, electoral models, that look more like Oklahoma City. And the nonpartisan nature is one of them. But actually, I think the most important is all the voters get to see all the candidates, and all the candidates have to face all the voters. So when you get a ballot for mayor in Oklahoma City, it has all the names on it of all the people who want to be the mayor. And even if it had a party label next to it, which it doesn't, I still think it would be even more valuable that you get to see all the names, because it incentivizes, and I should say, you get to, as a voter, and the candidate, I'm using these words intentionally, the candidate has to face you, right? So a candidate is not incentivized to appeal to the extremes of the ideological spectrum that they are incentivized to pursue in the closed partisan primaries that elect people at the state and federal level. And so people are always like kind of mystified. Man, we just this week we had, fifth best run city in America, right? Like, why does Oklahoma City always have these sort of unifying leaders and unifying policies and effective leadership, and everybody kind of likes the direction of the city? And I don't think it is any great mystery. It is how we elect people. It is the nonpartisan nature, but it is also this top two format. And
so an open primary, in effect.
Yeah, I mean, I usually get away from that word, that phrase open primary, because that means like infinite things to people. That open primary is a descriptor for lots of different kinds of systems, that some of which I don't think are actually that great. But any system, so I always try to characterize it with the principle that you need a system where all the candidates have to face all the voters, and all the voters get to see all the candidates. And then you, as a candidate, are incentivized, both as a candidate and as a elected person, to bring together coalitions, right? When I run for mayor, and I did this from the very beginning, I welcome the support. I lift up the support of Democrats and independents. Whereas obviously, if I was running for any other office in Oklahoma, Democrats and independents are just not numerically relevant, and your first phase that you face if you're a registered Republican is an electorate that is 100% Republican, literally. Like, that's how it works. And obviously you can imagine how that sort of warps your worldview and your approach, both as a candidate and in governance.
You up?
I'm up. Stephen, do you have a question? Because I have another question.
Go ahead. I just want to remind everyone, if you do have questions of your own, write them down on the cards. I'm walking around picking them up, and at the end we'll get staff all around looking for those questions.
So we had, one of the things that I've thought about in preparing for this is, and I'd love to hear what you all have to say, is there's a term that the New York Times article said earlier this year, talking about politically disengaged Americans, the exhausted majority. And I probably fall into that sometimes. Mm-hmm. So essentially 2/3 of Americans are largely disengaged from politics because they're repulsed by the polarization of the two parties. So what do you think about that? How do we talk about that? I think it's a dangerous place to be. Mm-hmm. I'm not an attorney like these two, or as civic a leader as these two, but I know, for example, in just counseling people, a counselor would rather have two people angry at each other than apathetic. Mm-hmm. So you're much more likely to you're not going to get anywhere with an apathetic, exhausted majority. So what do we do about that?
Well, I think the frustration and the apathy largely comes from a sense that the democratic process in American political life today is not translating widely held opinions into outcomes, into policies. And even the stickiest, most controversial issues in current American life, like guns and abortion, actually have some position that would get about 70% support. But like, there's no time in the electoral process other than through referendums where that 70% ever really gets to speak together, because they're not all registered the same. Some of them are Republicans, some of them are Democrats, some of them are independents. So you're seeing states where the process is possible, you're seeing people turn to these referendums that are passing, that could never have passed their legislatures, because their legislatures are not really elected by the majority of the people in that state. So I think just election after election, decade after decade of seeing sort of extremist representation and policy making that doesn't seem to capture how most people feel does tend to ultimately, I think, have the result of just sort of discouraging you from even caring anymore. And yes, this is extremely dangerous. And you know, I've been haunted in recent years when I think about an experience I had a while ago. I went to China in 2012. And I think that unfortunately, it doesn't feel like a lot of people could do that these days, and I wouldn't now, but I'm so glad I did then at a different time period when people, it seemed like both countries were trying a little more engagement than they do today. But all those experiences of traveling like that, especially to countries that seem, to have some sort of different ethos, is important, because when my experience from China was like, these are just normal people, and they are making money, and they're watching TV shows, and they're hanging out with their kids, and you're like, oh, this is like just like America in so many ways, with one very glaring and notable exception: they don't talk about politics, because they don't have politics, basically. And that would be, I guess, the experience and the observation I would have made if I go to any essentially autocratic place. And yet, there's a billion of them. They still survive, and they still have fun, and they still have entrepreneurial ideas, and they still enjoy entertainment. And so you realized that humans can live without politics, but that is not an ideal way to live. That as Winston Churchill said, what we have is the worst form of government except for all the others. And you need this freedom, you need this ability to have some impact on our collective future that the Chinese lack. And what concerns me about the direction of things in America is, do we have the same human capacity that they do to just stop caring about that stuff and just enjoy our TV shows and our businesses and our families and just let ourselves be ruled? It does seem like a shocking number of Americans not only could live being ruled, but actually desire to be ruled. And I think that is concerning. And all of it sort of starts with that apathy you just described.
Well, that New York Times article talking about the exhaustive majority said essentially 2/3 of Americans are largely disengaged from politics. And remarkable, I read a Pew poll that the highest public trust in our history was in the mid-90s, when you had Newt Gingrich as the speaker and you had Bill Clinton as the president. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to believe that was the high point, but it's been going straight down ever since. Yeah. And we really got to get our arms around this, because I dare say most of the people in this room have open minds and will listen to other ideas and not yell at you and call you dames. But there's a whole world out there that's in camps, and they're just listening to echo chambers, and the confirmation bias is just alive and well in this whole place. So somehow we have to figure out, and I see some young people in the back of the room here, maybe they can figure out how we can actually talk and compromise. Reagan always said, if I could get 70%, I'm good.
Right. Yeah.
And it's just something that, and I am curious, because we have a good range of ages here, starting with the oldest up here, and but I'd be very curious of the perception that some of you all, these are the teens that work with, aren't they?
Yeah, some of them.
Anybody got any comment about the perspective of people that are under 20 or 20-somethings? I mean, are you as disengaged and unconnected? There we've got a victim. I mean, we have.
Do I have to do anything?
this just on? Oh, it's just on. Okay. First, hi, I'm Summer Camper. I'm one of the Inasmuch Fellows. I'm 21, turning 22, so that's my perspective. I think a lot of us are disengaged, but a lot of us have just fear to be engaged, because once you enter that sphere, you kind of just see how everything is going down, and it kind of puts you at a discomfort and a level of unease to continue to go into that and keep trudging along, and wanting to solve things or put the effort into that when it doesn't feel like anything you do will change that because it's been in place for so long.
Thank you, Summer.
We have Bob Blackburn here, who's one of, if not the noted historian in Oklahoma. I'd be curious, Stephen, can you get a mic up here to Bob? I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but if you see that contrast between the 90s and today in terms of collegial conversations.
Well, I think part of it is media driven. We have so many options today to find your niche, and then that's all you watch and all you listen to and all you engage with. And that's going to take you off into radical, both directions in many cases. And then to the internet is a new way. You know, when even in the 90s, the newspaper was still the place we got most of our news. Mm-hmm. And maybe network news and local news. But you had some authority figures there that were living by certain standards of journalism and, you know, fairness and equity and all of that. Internet just undermines all of that, in my opinion. And you can listen to exactly what you want to. And with algorithms out there, with people using that, they find you and they feed you the information that you want to hear. And to me, I think that has been a big part of it. I don't see changes. Some of the changes in the education system obviously are there. But I think it's more the media and the way that people are engaging. When I first got involved with politics in Oklahoma City, we still had a caucus system where you'd go and you'd sit in a room with everybody and come up. In fact, that's where I met Mike Turpin in my first caucus meeting in 1978. But that was a good place to start learning, and then working on campaigns and working through the system. My wife was elected to the legislature, and watching that system work, I thought was good. Today, though, I think there's too much money involved in politics. I think that's driving a lot of it. And then people are speaking just to be able to raise money. And I think we need campaign finance reform. I think it's a fundamental issue. Then how to overcome and change the media, though, I don't have a solution for that. But that's my observation. That's changed since the 90s.
You know, I made a comment last week when I was worked around Henry Bellman for a long time, and he made the comment. We had Stephanie Bice where Susan is. He made the comment that where everything went bad was when you came home every weekend. He said, you know, when he was up there, you just couldn't do it. It wasn't practical. It cost too much. The flights weren't there. And so consequently, you went to church together. You went to Little League games together. I mean, you became friends. And you weren't always talking about abortion or whatever the hot subject was. And that now today, everybody goes home every weekend. So they never really get to know each other.
Human relationships, yeah.
The other thing that I always pointed out is these days, most of our elected officials, in my opinion, are conducting themselves so they don't get a primary. If they're Democrats, they're going to get a primary from the left. If they're Republicans, they're going to get a primary from the right. So if I compromise, I'm a Republican and compromise with Democrats, I'm going to get somebody. Mm-hmm. And so the whole game is avoid a primary. And that is not compatible with good government.
Right. That's basically putting 15% of the entire populace in charge of everything. And they're not like the wisest 15%. They're the most extreme 15%. And that's what you're seeing in so many states, red or blue. And that's why I would argue all of what Bob said should happen, but to me, the number one most important change that would make the biggest difference would be some sort of electoral change to where that primary is not what you're so consumed by.
Yeah, yeah. Any comments out here in the audience, or take us on, say we're crazy?
Well, I think it's interesting in the early conversations, I heard some comments on people being really disenchanted by the lack of cooperation and compromise that's happening. But then there are some others who felt like there were lines that where compromise shouldn't happen. In fact, maybe, this polarization is a result of these lines that people are unwilling to cross. I thought that was really interesting table talk early on.
I was going to say about the perspective of I'm a 16-year-old girl. I think that most of my peers are disengaged because they don't understand. They aren't informed. They haven't learned about it yet, which is probably something that they should learn about, but they still think that they're so young that it doesn't affect them just because they haven't been taught that it does affect them and this is our lives, and in like a couple years we are adults and we have to deal with the consequences of the voting and the decisions that are being made. But I just think that we're disengaged because we don't know. We haven't learned. We don't take the steps to learn. We just see it and don't inform ourselves.
Good point. And if it's not on TikTok.
Yeah, political change is hard because it involves all this consensus building. Maybe back to my first point, it takes time. And that can be a discouraging factor, especially for young people. Is maybe one of the first things we should lead with in civics education is like, hey, this is like a really, like, yes, one man or woman can make a difference, but it's going to take a long time and a lot of coalition building, and then sometimes, most of the time, your biggest achievement is going to be incremental. And that's the American democratic process, But you can make a difference, but you do have to, maybe we should do a better job of setting expectations. Because a lot of the sort of pushback I feel like I get in terms of apathy, in addition to I think the stuff I said earlier, is also even when the process is working as it should and did for 200 years, that's still kind of frustrating to some people, And that's why they also turn to autocracy, because it's like, well, that's efficient anyways.
There was a question in line with what Layla shared, and maybe there's a disconnect here. So this question is, how do you use the past to inform the present and future? For example, jail time and all the and maybe even more generally. Okay. Oh, the jail. Oh, new jail.
I'm sorry. Is this Felix's question?
Yes.
Wait, give it. Can you give Felix the mic? Just explain yourself a little bit more.
Just in general, first, thank you for being here today.
Sure.
Best mayor in America.
Well, you're very kind. Best. All right. Very nice. Very nice. But I want to say, best teacher in Oklahoma City, teacher of the year last year.
Yeah. Let's trade seats. Go Pokes. Just in general.
I told you he was smart.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah. I live in the best city too. And so just in general, how do you use in your position, mayor, and you got 30% who are always going to be dissatisfied, but you also have to find consensus. And we talked about hot issues. And one of the hottest issues that we have today is the jail. And we have to find a place to put it, but we also have to consider and weigh history as we make those decisions. And not just the jail, but in general, when we talk about decisions that are affecting the city, and just you have to walk away from and have to find consensus and get those things done. Mm-hmm. How do you approach that?
So how do you approach, you say, just tough problems? I mean, using history. Well, okay, so I will say this, and maybe this is responsive to your question. When I'm voting, I want experience. I want people in these positions because I know how much I draw upon experience in what I do today. I got to be the mayor's chief of staff for 5 years. I got to be an elected official in the state senate for 8 years. And practically every single thing I do every single day, I always think, oh, this is like this. So certainly, I mean, maybe I look to history, like maybe I also think, oh, this is just like what Napoleon had to deal with. I don't know. But I also think this is just like what David Holt had to deal with in 2009. And so when people are running, especially for high-level executive positions like governor or president or something, and they've never been elected to anything, they don't know anything about the government, this is a very complex enterprise, you know, like I tend to want somebody who's got that experience. It may be that maybe they are somebody who's introspective and definitely tries to draw from historical lessons, but at the same time, if they have none of their own to draw upon, it's definitely going to make an impact. So yes, I mean, absolutely. I think we have a rich history in these last 30 years in Oklahoma City of getting things done, and not only has that built a nice sort of momentum and political culture of getting things done here in Oklahoma City, but also has given us a lot of stories to draw upon and a lot of experiences, and it seems like we just keep getting better at things, but it's because a lot of the same people are involved and a lot of that kind of collective wisdom is being passed on. So absolutely, yeah, I mean, I definitely draw upon history as I try to do my part in guiding this community. Is that responsive?
Yeah, specifically like, in jail.
So, I mean, I would have done things completely differently, but I'm not a part of that process. So, I mean, and it's not useful for me to tell you I mean, maybe in a conversation over a beer, I'll tell you those things, but, but yeah, I have lots of thoughts, but, you know, but ultimately, you know, I'm tasked with doing this portfolio, and that was somebody else's portfolio, and that is what it is sometimes. But
I have just a thought and a question for y'all. Part of better conversations is listening. I think people don't listen anymore, like really listen, or take a big deep breath and take the time. I think really important things, and haven't done things this way many times, but if we listen more and really hear the other person and see their humanity, like you said earlier, then I think that we're more likely to find a solution to our common problem. Very hard sometimes when it's a emotionally charged issue. But how do you think we change people's listening ears, as Disney likes to put it?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely have to recondition Americans to listen, to accept pluralism and compromise as inherently parts of our system. And again, it's like leadership is not necessarily incentivized to do that because they're running in these primaries where everybody has the same opinion and they're just trying to outdo each other to be most strident in it. So, yeah, you need leaders who are kind of holding up, you know. And by the way, let me dig deep on pluralism because I think it's on point of your question, but it's not a word that people use a lot. But we learn about it in political science, right? Pluralism is the idea that you're going to have a whole lot of different worldviews, and you're always going to have a whole lot of different worldviews, and you are never going to exterminate some other worldviews, you know? Like, you're just going to have to figure out how to continue to coexist and arrive at outcomes that are good enough. And so certainly that involves pluralism, requires listening and trying to see, okay, I bet there's some common purpose here, some common ground that we actually share, as you said, Burns, the 70%, you know, that we share in common makes you my best friend, not my enemy, you know. So I think that, yeah, listening is important, but gosh, it's just, yeah, it's not being modeled. And
well,
again,
to listen, I mean, it takes humility. It takes empathy. I mean, it takes
yes,
time.
God, great words for leadership, empathy and humility, and we lack a lot of that right now.
Yeah, and if I'm really trying to understand, I'm not trying to persuade you, I'm just trying to understand why you feel the way you feel. Mm-hmm. And honestly, that's the way we did Flashpoint for years. I mean, I'm not trying to persuade Turpin of anything. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to just state my view in a way that hopefully is not offensive. But I don't think we realize that listening is parallel with humility. That I don't know it all. Mm-hmm. And I may learn something from you I didn't know. But Felix, last week we were talking about that. The other problem here is we're not able to agree on what the truth is. Right. And when you get in that boat, it's really hard to figure out a way around it. If you think the election in 20 was stolen, I've never seen any evidence of that. but if that's what you think the truth is, it's hard for us to get past that.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I'm getting more and more. And so, David, earlier you'd mentioned the 70% in the middle, and this question speaks to that. How can we encourage people to be proud of being part of that 70%, or like moderates, which seems to be a bad word nowadays?
Right. It's like
Communist.
well, I was going to say it's like people that are willing to compromise and are moderated in their views. Like it's hard to get you really, they don't march in the streets, right? What do we want? Incremental progress. When do we want it? At a time that is appropriate. I mean, but that's the reality that of how things actually have gotten done in this country. I mean, actually, all the things that we now hold up as some of the biggest achievements in American history were actually probably viewed as not enough at the time by certain parties, right? And obviously reviewed as too much by others, and so it was kind of right where it probably needed to be at that time period. So, I think you need. But okay, so to answer your question though, first of all, you need processes like electoral processes that actually incentivize people to rally that 70% in the middle. And again, I would argue in Oklahoma City we have one of those processes, so I do that. I actually spend probably a surprising amount of time talking about like how we do things as much as I talk about what we're going to do. I mean, if you were to read my State of the City addresses, you would note that like a lot of it's about this, not we're going to go pass a bond issue, we're going to go chase the Olympics. It's also like, hey guys, like I'm trying to remind people like how we work together. But I'm incentivized to do that. So I think that's the first thing you need. And then obviously you hope you would have leaders that would rally that rhetorically. I mean, that's actually, there is a point to have elected leaders, and they have obligations and responsibilities. And unfortunately, far too many of them in recent years have fallen short of even trying to bring people together. But again, they're not, I mean, I get it in a sense because it's a rational response to the incentive structures that they've been given in our electoral processes. But yes, there is like this movement dying to be ignited in this country where somebody says, enough of this craziness. Let's normal people unite. And there's a lot of us, and we just want to work together to get things done, and we don't care so much how people are registered.
Well, it's very important that I applaud the Memorial for convening these meetings, because when you have people like Doris Kearns Goodwin or John Meacham saying this is like the 1850s before the Civil War, I mean, these are very serious times. We're very seriously divided in this country, and we've got to find an answer. I saw this PBS NPR poll said, do Americans have to resort to violence to get the country back on track? Strongly agreeing with the statement, we're 28% of Republicans and 12% of Democrats. I guess that's good news that the majority don't. I'm trying to look at the silver lining there, but that's pretty outrageous.
Right. No, I mean, obviously it's terrifying, and this is like why we're here. I mean, this is why this memorial bears a lesson for the country, because we have a scar in our downtown that reminds you of what happens when you take this kind of nonsense to its logical outcome, that you believe in political violence and you believe in dehumanizing your political enemies. So yes, I mean, we got to keep standing against that. But yeah, I mean, you're going to have rhetoric this year from candidates all the way to the top that are going to dehumanize, and they're going to say that fellow Americans are enemies and vermin, and all these dehumanizing words that have generally predated horrific events in human history. It starts with words and it ends with gas chambers, and so like we've got to find leaders that are willing to forcefully pull us back towards the middle.
Yeah, it's kind of like faculty dealing with faculty. When I was named president, Robert Henry sent me a book by a former president of University of Texas. And in it, he said it was a primer for new university presidents or mayors or anybody else. And he said, early on, you will be told by the chairman of the faculty senate that faculty morale is at an all-time low. You shouldn't be too alarmed by that, because that's the highest faculty morale ever gets. It might fall below all-time low, but it's never. So you just get. And frankly, just as an aside, I never found that to be true. I really didn't.
There were several questions that spoke to, I think, a problem we talked about earlier, and that is you have these super majorities especially in places like Oklahoma and the Oklahoma House and Senate, and also like nationally, you see places where there are hyper majorities. And this question, how do we change processes when the existing party structures have so much control and so much to lose with change? Like what is, like how do you see moving in that direction if parties don't want to lose control?
Right. Yeah. I mean, what I just described, an electoral system for the state of Oklahoma that is more like Oklahoma City's, is not going to be adopted by the legislature. Fortunately, we live in a state where you can gather petitions and signatures and you can change things. It's very expensive and it's very time consuming, but it can be done, and it certainly has been. We generally have some sort of petition driven question on the ballot almost every general election. So you know, there are definitely people in this state right now having these conversations about what we're talking about, and that to me is pretty important. But no, you're right. I mean, every elected official in Oklahoma will oppose the kind of reforms I'm talking about, and that in itself should probably say something.
On the other side of the spectrum, you know, we can talk about legislatures having these conversations. What about on the public, very local level? Right? How do we talk about these charged issues? And so there are a couple questions about that, like just how do we get started on things like, for example, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or these topics that are very, very charged with very, very high emotions. How do we build a culture where we can have those conversations?
I guess it's like a muscle. You gotta flex it from time to time, and maybe we're not really. Yeah, I mean that's why Carrie didn't just have one better conversation and call it a day. I mean, like, we're trying to create more and more opportunities for people to get used to, again, sort of having these tough conversations. They're always tough conversations. I mean, you know, there was like an old idiom, right? Like, you don't talk about religion and politics. Like, I mean, so it's not like these were ever easy, but I think we were at one time a lot better at having them, and we just need to keep practicing.
I congratulate the memorial on starting this and continuing it, because, and I wish more places would do it in their fashion so that there's just more opportunity for people. So, another one?
Yeah, here's a light one. Something I'm curious about too. What is the likelihood that the super skyscraper becomes a reality? And also, like, what are the pluses and minuses that are being talked about on the city council?
Just going to dive right into city issues now. Okay, that's fine.
Fall right into the river.
What's that?
It would fall right into the river.
I don't know. I mean, honestly, in the end of the day, who knows? I know I've talked to the developer. I mean, I believe he believes that it's going to happen, but it is a phase 2 of a development that involves a phase 1 that I am more hopeful and expectant of, that has multiple Oklahoma City-sized towers, 300-400 feet. They would have condos and a hotel. And I guess his phase 2 vision depends on the success of phase 1. So we'll see how it goes. But, I'm not necessarily banking on it. It has been amazing at how much attention that has gotten. It is like the #1 question I get asked all around the country since it was front page of the Wall Street Journal and New York Times and all these other places. I mean, if it was just a PR stunt, it worked. I would much prefer, I hope moving forward, maybe I can get more questions about the Olympics and less on the tower. But
Absolutely.
Here's a question. Yeah, there.
Well, we're doing written questions.
Okay.
Okay, so maybe a little more difficult, but I think it speaks to kind of representing everybody. The article that you posted about us being 10th best for new college grads, which I think is amazing. We also ranked, and this is not my numbers, this is on the question, low 84th in education, 109th in health, 70th in safety. And so the question is it good to cherry pick data? But really I think the larger question is, how do we celebrate the good news but continue to work on those things we clearly need to work on? And maybe speak on some of those.
Sure. I mean, that's a fundamental challenge of leadership, right? You always want to be optimistic, and yet you also don't want to sugarcoat the challenges, and you just try to find the right mix of being honest about the challenges, but also showing, hey, here's a path how we can move to a better place in regards to those challenges. And then you sort of use the wins to show that, hey, we have established some momentum in other areas, and maybe we can apply that same success to this challenging area. I will say most of the time, people, I'll say, hey, here's a really good ranking for Oklahoma City, and someone will say, well, here's a really bad ranking for Oklahoma. And I'm always like, I said Oklahoma City. So, Oklahoma City's numbers are much, much better than the state of Oklahoma's, and I have no control over that. I can just control to the extent I have any control at all. But I can only influence this 620 square miles, and that's what I think we have had a lot of success as a community doing, is improving our numbers and have some amazing things to point to. And though I'm sure not every one of our numbers is where we want it to be, we certainly are better than the rest of the state. I mean, it just is what it is. And then we'll try to keep working to improve upon the things that we can here in Oklahoma City. But yeah, I push back. A lot of times I get this like, well, Oklahoma sucks. Well, Oklahoma City is not Oklahoma. And I have to spread that message all the time around the country, because obviously the state is not in a great place, doesn't have a great reputation, but the city has a wonderful reputation right now, and certainly we want to build upon that.
And, a lot of that is because we have had a remarkable string of mayors. I'm not being
well.
I mean,
we
really have.
But again, I get back. It's the process. It's the process.
You go back to Mayor Norick, and then Ron Norick, and then Kirk Humphreys, and Mick Cornett, and now you. I mean, not many cities can point to that.
Right, but again, I think it's so much of it is the process that incentivizes good people to run, good people to serve in a good way, and the state process just doesn't have the same incentive structure. But we have had a lot of continuity. I mean, that's for sure. Others around the country who are like, I remember the executive director of the Conference of Mayors has been in his job for 55 years. I'm not kidding, and so he has a lot of experience. And he always says what's unique about Oklahoma City and our mayors is that each of them has handed a baton to the next one. Normally, in his observation, the next mayor is the next mayor, his first job is to undo everything that the last mayor did, and we certainly have not had that culture here.
So 620 square miles.
Oh, that's a whole other thing. You want to go into that right now?
Yeah. It's a fun fact.
Yeah, Boston is 70. To give you a comparison, this is one of the very unique challenges that we gave ourselves in the 50s and 60s, and I do talk about it a lot because it's like I just need people to understand that we have a very unique challenge in Oklahoma City because of that choice to annex so much of central Oklahoma. And so I often in my State of the City address, you can rattle off 10 to 15 cities that everybody's heard of that could fit within the city limits of Oklahoma City simultaneously. And so I use Boston a lot because they're like 70 square miles. So we're like 10 Bostons, but they have about the same number of people. So our people, we're not getting a check from anybody else. We got to make do with the tax dollars that we have. Our people are each more responsible for more asphalt, more water pipes, more pieces of fire stations than the people of Boston are. And so that's why sometimes people are frustrated with basic infrastructure here, including our street conditions, because it's like we actually we are not like other cities in that respect. We have a unique challenge.
What a good deal they got.
Yeah, well, all the other, especially north and eastern cities, are all very tight.
Yeah. Okay, Stephen, sorry.
Well, we might have time for one or two. We're getting low on time. This one came from a student all the way over there in the corner who feels discouraged because he thinks political discussions have been made taboo in schools. And so any thoughts on, that and the importance of having conversations as students in the school system?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I almost want to call on Felix for this, but because I bet he's really pioneered, some ways to have those very complex conversations in the school setting where, of course, you don't want it to be done in a way that's not thoughtful and ends up projecting the teacher's views on the classroom. I mean, you want but you need to have a space for those kind of current event conversations. I mean, if I may, Felix, may I make you an answer giver now? How do you deal with that?
I just think first, actions speak louder than words. And as an educator, I have to model behavior that I want my students to exhibit. So showing up to these types of events to participate and make them aware of it, my staff, community members, so that way they can know what's available to them, so that way they can know how to properly involve and engage in civics and how we are all interconnected, even students, and how I think students can participate is through service. And I think that puts everybody universally on the ground together on the same level behind a shared experience. That's positive, that we all can have a collective a tie that we can use to help perpetuate values that I think are missing, and that might not be present in the home, but we can make them present in the schools. And so that's why we focus on service, because I think that's what makes Oklahoma great.
Yeah, so maybe back to the question, so you don't want state policies that discourage really talented people like Felix from skillfully leading those complicated conversations in the classroom. And yeah, unfortunately, it seems like we've had some laws that are trying to chill those conversations.
One more, Stephen?
Yeah, we're coming to the end of time, and I think that there's one that several people asked about, and it's just how everyone on the stage seems pretty hopeful about the political divide we're currently in. But how do we find hope in bridging this divide and moving to some place where we can have conversations and move forward? How do we remain hopeful, or maybe gain some hope? And I want each of you to kind of share kind of parting words in that regard.
Go ahead, Susan.
Well, I would second the service idea, because I do think when you give back, you do find, it's good for you, but you also find common humanity with the people that you're giving back with and to. That's why I'm involved with the memorial. It's because of the amazing work that they do and what it represents. So, I mean, I'm a bit of a Pollyanna, so I turn to hope over fear, and but I think that if you don't take the time to kind of know yourself and know what you believe and give yourself time to think through those things, I think if you figure that out and share that, you're going to be hopeful, because you're going to find other ways to gain hope in whatever avenue that is. But most of us don't take the time to sit and think about who I am, and not what I believe on a giant picture necessarily, but who am I? What do I believe? And how do I then turn that into something that makes the world a better place? So.
I'll take a crack at it, and then you be the cleanup hitter.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, hope is fundamental to the human condition. I mean, if you don't have hope, in fact, there's a book I'm reading right now by Nick Kristof, the New York Times columnist, called "Chasing Hope," and that's really what we're doing here. Is we're chasing hope, and you never can quite catch it, but that's just part of being a human being. And so don't lose hope. That's the last thing you want to lose. And I think we will get there. And I think hopefully we're going to get past this 1850 analogy and start moving forward back to who would have thought go back to the 90s. But that's my 2 cents about it. Chase hope.
I agree, but you can't wait for hope to be shoveled into your mouth. You have to work for it. So you have to do the work on yourself, and you have to do the work outside. I think
good point.
Yeah.
I think, so the question was looking for sources of hope. I think Oklahoma City should give you hope. We are actually, and I think you should take pride in this, we're really part of a pretty unique political experiment right now. And I talk about it a lot, and I obviously try to encourage it. And we've basically examined it every which way this last hour. But Oklahoma City is consistently having, 70% of people vote for its mayors and its initiatives when we are basically a purple city. The most recent presidential election, the Republican beat the Democrat by 1 point. It's basically a 50-50 place, but people are clearly voting. People who are registered Democrats, Republicans, and Independents are clearly voting the same way on local issues, and it is not an accident. We are taking a very a very inclusive, pragmatic approach, and we're building coalitions, and we're working through the tough work of consensus building, and people are noticing. So, I gave some remarks a couple months ago about what I felt was Oklahoma City's unique political culture, and this reporter from Die Zeit, which is like the Time magazine of Germany, was in that audience in Washington, D.C., and she was so intrigued by what I was saying, because it is obviously so so much of an outlier in current American political life that she came to Oklahoma City and spent days here just to really check out whether this was true or whether I had just gone on the road and exaggerated what was happening here. And she didn't just talk to me, she talked to dozens of people. And she concluded that it was true, that we really are a pretty special place. And she wrote a really cool story, which you do have to translate, but you can look up online. And was very prominently featured in their weekly news magazine just last week. And the headline was "Where America Still Works." It was in German, but it was the German version of that, "Where America Still Works," and it was all about Oklahoma City. So we actually are in a very unique place. It should give others hope, and it certainly should give you hope. You should be an ambassador for what we're doing here and be proud of it and try to see if we can model that behavior for the rest of the country.
We had a few questions that were directed specifically to individual, and we'll hand those off, and so maybe you'll get a personal response. But I want to thank the Kirkpatrick Foundation for supporting Better Conversations. Thank you so much to our esteemed hosts and guests. Thank you so much for doing this. Let's give them a hand.
Thank you.
And I also want to thank you for coming. I mean, look at this room. I mean, we have over 70 people in here who gave up an hour or more during their lunchtime to come talk and hear about civics, which I think is pretty awesome. So give yourself a hand. Next week, July 2nd, there will be a Better Conversation, which I think will be really, really interesting. It comes from this idea that came from Timothy McVeigh that you can love your country but hate your government. How is that possible? Have we maybe misunderstood something about being a patriot and our founding fathers? And also on the same thing, same concept that we're talking about today, how might we combat that? And so I hope that you can attend. Sign up is on the website. And if you have a moment, the QR code is up there. I would love to get your feedback. I'll also be sending the survey out to you because we always want to do better. And so thank you so much one more time. Please give yourself, as well as our hosts and our guest, a hand.
Good job.
So good.
You bet.